The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting their cold, unforgiving glow across the emergency room. Elena Ricci lay on the narrow gurney, her dark hair splayed against the thin pillow like spilled ink, her skin pale as winter moonlight. Blood seeped through the bandage pressed against her side, crimson blooming through white gauze. Her lips moved, barely parting, and the nurse leaning close had to strain to hear the whisper that escaped them. A name. Just 2 syllables. Lorenzo. The word hung in the sterile air like a prayer, like a curse, like something sacred and forbidden all at once. And then the emergency room doors burst open and every single person in that room went completely, utterly still. Thank you so much for being here. Stories like this exist because of listeners like you. If this touches your heart, please like, share, and subscribe. He stood in the doorway like a figure carved from shadow and stone, 6 feet 2 inches of controlled devastation wrapped in a midnight black suit that cost more than most people earned in a month. Lorenzo DeSantis. The name itself carried weight in this city, whispered in back rooms and feared in boardrooms. His dark hair was slicked back from a face that belonged on Renaissance paintings, all sharp angles and dangerous beauty. But it was his eyes that made the security guard step backward, that made the triage nurse's hand tremble against her clipboard. Piercing. Completely unreadable. The Italian script tattooed along the side of his neck disappeared beneath his collar, but the ink on his knuckles was visible as he adjusted his cuff. Symbols of power, of blood oaths taken and kept. More tattoos curled up his forearms beneath the crisp white shirt, visible where he'd rolled his sleeves to the elbow. Every mark on his skin told a story. Every story ended with someone else's pain. 2 men flanked him, their presence unnecessary. No one in this room would dare challenge Lorenzo DeSantis. Not the doctors frozen mid-step. Not the nurses clutching their charts like shields. Not even the security guard whose hand hovered uselessly near his radio. Lorenzo's gaze swept the emergency room with the practiced efficiency of a predator surveying territory. He noted exits, threats, weaknesses. And then his eyes landed on the gurney in the corner, on the woman lying there with blood seeping through her bandages. And something shifted in his expression. It was subtle. A tightening of his jaw. A slight narrowing of those cold eyes. But his right-hand man Marco had known him for 15 years, and he'd never seen that particular look on Lorenzo's face before. Everyone out. Lorenzo's voice was quiet. Didn't need to be loud. Authority like his didn't require volume. Now. The head doctor stepped forward, his professional dignity warring with his survival instincts. Sir, I'm afraid I can't allow. Lorenzo turned his gaze on the doctor, and the man's words died in his throat. The tattoo on Lorenzo's neck seemed to pulse in the harsh lighting, Italian words that translated roughly to, death before dishonor. The doctor had heard the rumors about what happened to people who stood in Lorenzo DeSantis's way. He treated some of those people. The ones who survived. I said, Lorenzo repeated, each word dropping like a stone into still water. Everyone out. Except the nurse treating her. The room emptied in seconds. Patients were wheeled away. Staff scattered. The security guard practically ran for the exit. Only the young nurse remained, her hands shaking as she continued applying pressure to Elena's wound. Lorenzo moved toward the gurney with the fluid grace of someone who had learned to walk silently, to become shadow when necessary. His Italian leather shoes made no sound against the linoleum. Up close, he could see the details his distance had obscured. The flutter of her pulse in her throat, the smear of blood across her cheekbone, the way her lips still moved in unconscious whispers. Still saying his name. What happened to her? His voice was dangerously soft. The nurse, her name tag read Sarah, swallowed hard. Stabbing victim. She was found in an alley 3 blocks from here. No ID. She was conscious when the ambulance brought her in, but she lost a lot of blood. She keeps. Sarah hesitated, then continued. He keeps saying your name, sir. She was conscious for a few minutes when she first arrived. She asked for you specifically. Lorenzo stood perfectly still, his tattoos dark against his olive skin, his expression revealing nothing. But his mind was racing, flipping through memories like cards in a deck, searching for this face, this woman, this impossible connection. He didn't know her. He was certain he didn't know her. And yet something about the curve of her jaw, the particular shade of dark brown in her hair, tugged at a thread in his memory. Something buried. something he'd deliberately forgotten. Her wound. His eyes dropped to the crimson-stained bandages. How bad? The knife missed anything vital, but she needs surgery to close the laceration properly. She's stable for now, but whatever she needs. Lorenzo cut her off. The best surgeon in this hospital. Private room. Security outside her door. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice had dropped to something almost soft. Almost human. No one touches her without my approval. Understood. Sarah nodded frantically, her eyes wide with fear and confusion. She'd worked in this year for 3 years. She'd seen gang members come in with their crews, had witnessed the particular violence that came with territorial disputes. But this was different. This man, this terrifying, powerful man, was looking at her patient like she was the only real thing in the room. Lorenzo reached into his jacket pocket. Sarah flinched and withdrew a phone. He typed something quickly, then returned his attention to the unconscious woman. Her name. It wasn't a question. It was a demand. We don't know. Like I said, no ID. She was Elena. The word came from the gurney itself, and both Lorenzo and the nurse went rigid. Elena's eyes had opened, deep brown, unfocused but unmistakably aware. She was looking at Lorenzo with an expression that made no sense, that contained too many emotions to catalog. Fear, relief, despair. And underneath it all, something that looked almost like love. My name is Elena, she whispered. Elena Ricci. The name hit Lorenzo like a bullet. The room seemed to tilt. His carefully constructed walls, the ones he'd built over 15 years of violence and control, developed their first crack. Leave us. His voice came out rough. Unpolished. Human in a way that made Marco step forward in concern from his position by the door. Boss. Now Marco. The room emptied again. The nurse fled. Marco hesitated for a long moment before following, pulling the curtain closed behind him. Lorenzo stood alone with Elena Ricci, with a ghost from a past he'd spent 15 years trying to bury. You're dead. His voice was barely audible. The fire. Your entire family. They told me. He stopped. Regrouped. When he spoke again, his voice was steady, but his hands, his tattooed, deadly hands, had balled into fists. You're supposed to be dead. Elena's eyes fluttered, her consciousness wavering at the edges. But she fought it. She fought to stay present, to look at him, to speak. I know what they told you. Her voice was thread-thin. I know what you believed. But I survived, Lorenzo. I survived, and I've been hiding ever since. Her eyes closed briefly, then opened again with visible effort. But they found me. Tonight. They found me, and I knew you were the only one who could. She trailed off, consciousness slipping away like water through fingers. Her head fell back against the pillow, her chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. Lorenzo stood frozen, his world reshaping itself around this impossible truth. Elena Ricci. Daughter of the man who had saved his life when he was 18 years old, bleeding out in a warehouse, too proud and too stupid to ask for help. Daughter of the man who had taken him in, trained him, treated him like a son. Daughter of the man who had been murdered, along with his entire family, in a fire that had been set as a message. Lorenzo had spent the next decade hunting down everyone responsible for that fire. He'd dismantled criminal empires. He'd made men beg for death. He'd built his own kingdom on the bones of those who had taken everything from him. And all along she had been alive. The doors behind him opened and a surgeon entered, clearly called by the nurse who had fled. He took one look at Lorenzo, at the coiled violence in his posture, at the visible tattoos that marked him as something other than ordinary, and hesitated. The patient needs surgery. The doctor's voice was carefully neutral. She's lost significant blood and the wound needs proper closure. Lorenzo didn't turn around. His eyes remained fixed on Elena's face, on the soft curve of her cheek, on the blood still smeared across her skin. Then take her to surgery. His voice was ice. And understand this, doctor. If she doesn't walk out of this hospital alive and whole, neither do you. The threat hung in the air, absolute and unquestionable. The doctor nodded once, then gestured for the orderlies who had gathered nervously in the hallway. Lorenzo stepped back as they wheeled Elena away, his mind still reeling, his carefully ordered world in chaos. He watched until the gurney disappeared through the surgical suite doors, then pulled out his phone. Marco. His voice betrayed nothing. I need everything you can find on Elena Ricci. The official story says she died in the fire with her family 15 years ago. I need to know where she's been since then. Who she's been with. And who found her tonight. He paused and his next words came out soft and deadly. Someone stabbed her. I want to know who. He ended the call before Marco could respond, then stood alone in the empty corridor, his reflection ghosting across the surgical suite windows. The man staring back at him was the same man he'd been this morning. Powerful, controlled, untouchable. But something had shifted. Something had cracked open. Elena Ricci was alive. And someone had tried to kill her. Hours passed. Lorenzo didn't sit in the waiting room like a civilian. He stood in the hallway outside the surgical suite, a dark sentinel that made nurses find alternate routes and doctors quicken their pace. His right-hand man brought him coffee he didn't drink and updates he barely heard. The surgery was going well. The wound was being closed. She would recover. But Lorenzo wasn't thinking about the surgery. He was thinking about a night 15 years ago when he'd been 20 years old and drowning in grief and rage, when he'd stood outside the smoking ruins of the Ricci home and sworn an oath in blood. He was thinking about a 9-year-old girl with dark hair and serious eyes, who had once asked him why he was always so sad. He was thinking about the way she'd laughed when he'd let her win at cards, the way she'd brought him water when he trained in her father's basement, the way she'd looked at him like he was a hero instead of the broken violent thing he knew himself to be. She had been a child then. Innocent. Pure. The only good thing in his world of darkness. And then she had died. Except she hadn't. The surgical suite doors opened and the doctor emerged, pulling off his mask. He flinched when he saw Lorenzo still standing there, but professionalism won out over fear. The surgery was successful. She'll need time to recover, but she should make a full physical recovery. We're moving her to a private room now. The doctor hesitated. She was asking for you. When the anesthesia started wearing off. She was saying your name again. Something flickered in Lorenzo's cold eyes. Something that might have been pain, might have been hope, might have been the first stirring of an obsession that would consume him entirely. The room number. 412. But visiting hours. Lorenzo was already walking away. Room 412 was on the private floor, reserved for patients who could afford discretion. Lorenzo had made a single phone call, and suddenly Elena Ricci was registered under a false name with a security detail that answered only to him. She was awake when he entered. Fragile. Connected to monitors that beeped steadily in the quiet room. But her eyes were clear now, and when she saw him she didn't look away. Lorenzo closed the door behind him, then stood against it, maintaining distance. The tattoos on his forearms were dark in the dim lighting, the Italian script on his neck disappearing into shadow. He looked exactly like what he was. A dangerous man, a killer, someone who had long ago sold his soul for power. But Elena looked at him and she didn't see any of that. She saw the 20-year-old boy who had guarded her door when she had nightmares. She saw the young man who had brought her ice cream in secret because her father didn't allow sweets before dinner. She saw Lorenzo, just Lorenzo, the way she had always seen him. You're angry. Her voice was rough from the surgery but stronger than before. I'm not angry. His voice was flat. Controlled. I'm trying to understand how you've been alive for 15 years without me knowing. Elena's eyes filled with tears she didn't shed. You were angry. When I knew you. You were always angry, but you never showed it. You go still just like this. Like a statue. A small, sad smile curved her lips. You haven't changed. You have. The words came out before he could stop them. His eyes moved over her face, cataloging the differences. The child he remembered was gone, replaced by a woman. Fragile but fierce, broken but beautiful. She had grown into her features, into those serious eyes that had always seen too much. You're not a child anymore. I'm 24. She said it quietly as if age was something shameful. I've lived a whole life since the fire. A different life. Tell me. It wasn't a request. Elena knew Lorenzo well enough to understand that. Even as a boy he had commanded rather than asked. It was simply who he was. She shifted in the hospital bed, wincing at the pull of her stitches, and began to speak. She told him about the night of the fire. About waking to smoke and screaming, about her father's hands pushing her through a hidden passage she hadn't known existed, about emerging into the cold night air and seeing her home in flames behind her. She told him about running, about being found by a woman who had owed her father a debt, about being hidden, renamed, erased. My father had contingencies. Her voice broke slightly. He knew something was coming. He never told me, but he must have known. He had plans in place to get me out if anything happened. The woman who took me, Maria, she raised me in a small town up north. I went to school. I went to nursing school. I tried to be normal. She looked at him and the tears finally spilled over. I tried to forget. Lorenzo absorbed her words in silence, his expression revealing nothing. But his mind was working, piecing together implications and consequences. Your father was killed because he knew something. It wasn't a question. He was killed because he had information that someone wanted buried. And they killed your family to make sure no one could inherit that knowledge. Elena nodded slowly. I've spent 15 years trying to figure out what he knew. What was worth killing all of them for? Her hands twisted in the hospital blanket. I think I finally found it. 3 days ago I accessed files I wasn't supposed to access. I found evidence of transactions, money, weapons, names I recognized. She met his eyes. Your name was in those files, Lorenzo. He went very still. Not as a participant, she added quickly. As a target. Whatever my father knew, whatever he was protecting, it involved a plot against you. Against the DeSantis family. Someone wanted you dead 15 years ago, and they killed my father to keep him from warning you. The revelation settled over Lorenzo like ice water. His father had been murdered when Lorenzo was 19. He'd been told it was a rival family, that it was business as usual. He'd built his empire on that foundation, on avenging that death. But if Elena was right, someone stabbed you tonight. His voice was dangerous. Someone found out you were looking into those files. Yes. Elena's voice was barely audible. I don't know how they knew, but they found me. 2 men. They came to my apartment. Her hands trembled. I fought. I ran. But one of them caught me. She touched her bandaged side. I got away. I made it to the street. And I knew I had to find you. You were the only one who could protect me from this. You were the only one who would want to. Lorenzo crossed the room in 3 strides. He stood beside her bed, looking down at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. This close, she could see the details of his tattoos. The intricate script, the symbolic markings, the record of violence and survival written on his skin. She could smell his cologne, something dark and expensive. She could see the slight tremor in his jaw as he fought for control. Why didn't you come to me sooner? The question came out rough. Raw. 15 years, Elena. 15 years I believed you were dead. Do you have any idea what that did to me? The confession slipped out before he could stop it. He saw the impact of his words in her eyes. The surprise, the hope, the grief. I was scared. Her voice was barely a whisper. I was 9 years old when I lost everything. And then I was 14, 15, 16. I was a child who became a teenager who became a woman, and the whole time I was terrified. Of the people who killed my family. Of being found. She paused, and her next words came out so quietly he had to lean closer to hear them. Of you. Lorenzo's jaw tightened. Of me. You were already becoming something dangerous when I knew you. My father saw it. He told me once that you would either save the world or destroy it. Elena met his eyes. I watched from a distance. I saw what you became. The headlines. The rumors. The bodies. Her voice cracked. I didn't know if the Lorenzo I remembered still existed. Or if he'd been consumed by the monster everyone else saw. The words hit him like fists. He stepped back, creating distance, his expression shuddering closed. Maybe he was. His voice was ice again. Maybe the boy you knew died in that fire too. Maybe all that's left is the monster. I don't believe that. You should. He turned away, facing the window, his reflection a dark ghost against the glass. I've done things, Elena. Things your father would have been ashamed of. Things that would make you look at me differently if you knew. I know more than you think. Her voice was stronger now, steadier. I told you. I saw the files. I know what you've built, who you've hurt, how you've survived. I know you're not a good man, Lorenzo. He heard her shift in the bed, heard the rustle of sheets. But I also know you're the only man who's ever made me feel safe. Even after everything. Even knowing what you are. Lorenzo closed his eyes, his hands braced against the windowsill. His knuckles were white against the wood, his tattoos stark against his straining skin. Her words were doing something to him, cracking him open in ways he couldn't afford. He had built an empire on control, on emotional detachment, on never, ever letting anyone close enough to wound him. And here was Elena Ricci, risen from the dead, looking at him like he was still capable of being saved. You need to rest. He made his voice flat. Professional. I'll have my men stationed outside your door. No one will touch you. Lorenzo. Rest. He turned from the window, his expression closed off once more. I have work to do. He was at the door when her voice stopped him. I never stopped thinking about you. He froze, his hand on the doorknob. 15 years. Her voice trembled with the weight of her confession. Every night I wondered if you were alive. If you were safe. If you ever thought about me. The girl who used to fall asleep on your shoulder during movie nights. The girl you taught to play poker because you said I needed to learn to read faces. A soft, broken laugh. I got really good at poker, Lorenzo. Just like you taught me. He didn't turn around. He couldn't. If he turned around, if he looked at her, he would do something unforgivable. He would cross the room and gather her in his arms and promise her things he had no right to promise. Sleep, Elena. His voice was rough. I'll be back in the morning. He opened the door and walked out before she could respond. Marco was waiting in the hallway, his expression carefully neutral. He'd worked for Lorenzo DeSantis for 15 years. He knew better than to ask questions when his boss looked like murder incarnate. The men are in place. Marco fell into step beside Lorenzo as they walked toward the elevator. No one gets in or out without clearance. Good. Lorenzo's voice was clipped. What did you find? Not much yet. Elena Ricci officially died in the fire with her family. There's no paper trail after that. Whoever hit her knew what they were doing. I've got people looking into it, but it's going to take time. We don't have time. Lorenzo jabbed the elevator button with more force than necessary. Someone tried to kill her tonight. They'll try again. With all due respect, boss. Marco hesitated, choosing his words carefully. What is she to you? I remember the Ricci family. I know what they meant to you. But she was a child then, and now she's the daughter of the man who saved my life. Lorenzo's voice was ice and steel. She's the only survivor of a family that was murdered because of something they knew about me. She's a debt I need to repay. He met Marco's eyes, and the cold emptiness there made Marco step back involuntarily. And she's mine. Do you understand? Marco nodded slowly. He did understand. He'd seen Lorenzo claim territory before, seen him draw lines that no one dared cross. But this was different. This was personal in a way that nothing had been personal for a very long time. I understand, boss. I'll double the security detail. The elevator arrived with a soft chime. Lorenzo stepped inside, his reflection multiplying in the mirrored walls. A dozen dark figures, a dozen sets of cold eyes, a dozen visible tattoos proclaiming power and control. Find out who stabbed her. His voice echoed in the enclosed space. And Marco? When you do, bring them to me alive. I want to hear them scream. The doors closed on Marco's acknowledgement, and Lorenzo rode the elevator down in silence, his mind churning with revelations and implications. Elena Ricci was alive. Someone had tried to kill her. And whatever secret had gotten her family murdered 15 years ago, it was connected to him. To his father. To enemies he thought he'd already destroyed. The elevator opened onto the hospital lobby, and Lorenzo stepped out into the fluorescent brightness. His phone was already in his hand, his fingers moving across the screen with practiced efficiency. He had calls to make. People to summon. An empire to mobilize. Because whoever had touched Elena, whoever had spilled her blood in that alley, they had just made the biggest mistake of their very short remaining lives. Days passed. Lorenzo did not return to Elena's hospital room. He told himself it was strategy, that he needed to focus on finding her attackers, that he couldn't afford the distraction of her presence. He was lying. The truth was simpler and more terrifying. He was afraid. Afraid of what he felt when he looked at her. Afraid of the cracks she was putting in his carefully constructed walls. Afraid of the man he might become if he let her matter to him. So he kept his distance. He received reports from his men about her recovery. He ensured she had the best care, the most comfortable room, anything she could possibly need. But he didn't go to her. He told himself it was protection. He was protecting her from himself, from the darkness that lived inside him, from the violence that had become his native language. But every night, when the city grew quiet and his empire required nothing urgent, he found himself standing at his penthouse window, staring in the direction of the hospital, wondering if she was sleeping, wondering if she was safe, wondering if she was thinking about him too. "Boss." Marco's voice broke through his reverie on the fourth night. "We found something." Lorenzo turned from the window, his expression composed, his tattoos dark against his skin in the dim lighting of his office. "Talk." "The two men who attacked Elena, we identified them. Low-level enforcers working for the Caruso family." Marco placed a file on Lorenzo's desk, photographs of two unremarkable men who would soon be very, very dead. But here's where it gets interesting. The Caruso family shouldn't have any connection to Elena Ricci. She's been living under an assumed name for 15 years. There's no way they should have known who she was or where to find her. Lorenzo's eyes narrowed. Unless someone told them. Exactly. Marco flipped open the file, revealing additional documents. We traced the order back 3 steps. The Caruso enforcers were contacted by a middleman who was contacted by a lawyer who was contacted by... Marco paused for effect. Victor Moretti. The name landed like a bomb. Lorenzo went very still, his hands flat on his desk, his entire body radiating dangerous tension. Victor Moretti. His father's former business partner. The man who had stood beside Lorenzo at his father's funeral, who had helped him build the DeSantis empire, who had been like a second father to him for the past 15 years. "You're certain?" "I'm certain, boss. The trail leads directly to him." Victor ordered the hit on Elena Ricci. Lorenzo stood motionless for a long moment, processing this betrayal, recalibrating everything he thought he knew about his life and his allies. Victor was there. His voice was eerily calm. "The night of the fire. He helped me search for survivors. He stood with me at the funerals." "Yes. He's been at my side for 15 years. Advising me. Guiding me. Helping me build everything I have." "Yes. And now you're telling me he ordered the murder of the Ricci family." Lorenzo's voice dropped to a whisper. "That he's been lying to me for 15 years. Marco nodded slowly, watching his boss with the wariness of a man standing near a sleeping lion that might wake at any moment. Lorenzo moved. One moment he was standing behind his desk, still and controlled. The next he had swept everything off the surface. Lamp, files, phone, everything, sending it crashing to the floor in an explosion of violence. His hands gripped the edge of the desk, knuckles white, tendons straining, and the sound that came from his throat was barely human. It lasted only a moment. Then the mask slammed back into place and Lorenzo straightened, adjusted his cuffs and looked at Marco with eyes that promised death. "Find Victor." His voice was silk over steel. "Bring him to me. And clear the basement." Marco nodded. He knew what clearing the basement meant. He'd done it before on the rare occasions when Lorenzo's enemies required personal attention. "There's something else, boss." "What?" "Elena Ricci. She's been asking about you. Every day. The nurses say she won't settle, won't rest properly until she knows you're coming back." Something shifted in Lorenzo's expression. Something soft and painful that he quickly buried. "Tell her I'll come to her tomorrow." He turned back to the window, dismissing Marco with his posture. "Tonight I have other business." Marco left without another word. Lorenzo stood alone in his dark office, surrounded by the debris of his outburst, his mind already planning the interrogation that would come when Victor was brought to him. But underneath the rage, underneath the betrayal, there was something else. Elena was asking for him. She wouldn't rest until he came back. And despite everything, despite the violence he was about to commit, despite the darkness that was rising inside him like a tide, that knowledge made something warm bloom in his chest. Something that felt dangerously like hope. The basement was cold. Lorenzo had designed it that way. Cold, sparse, terrifying in its emptiness. The walls were concrete, unpainted, stained with things it was better not to think about. A single chair sat in the center of the room, bolted to the floor, waiting for its occupant. Victor Moretti arrived at 3 a.m., brought by 2 of Lorenzo's most trusted men. He was still in his pajamas, still confused, still believing that there must be some mistake. When he saw the basement, when he saw Lorenzo standing in the shadows with his sleeves rolled up to reveal the tattooed forearms beneath, The confusion in his eyes was replaced by fear. Lorenzo. Victor's voice trembled. What is this? What's happening? Sit down, Victor. Two pairs of hands pushed Victor into the chair. Restraints clicked into place around his wrists and ankles. Lorenzo emerged from the shadows slowly, letting Victor see him fully. Letting him see the cold emptiness in his eyes, the visible tattoos that marked him as something other than human, the complete absence of mercy in his expression. I'm going to ask you questions. Lorenzo's voice was soft. Conversational. You're going to answer them truthfully. If you lie to me, I'll know. And I'll make you regret it. Lorenzo, please. The Ricci family. Lorenzo cut him off, his voice sharp as a blade. 15 years ago. The fire that killed Salvatore Ricci and his wife and children. He leaned closer, close enough that Victor could see every detail of the tattoo on his neck. Tell me about it. Victor's face went pale. His breathing quickened. His eyes darted toward the exit, toward the guards, toward anything that might offer escape. I don't know what you're talking about. Lorenzo's fist connected with Victor's jaw before the lie had finished leaving his lips. The impact was precise, controlled, designed to cause maximum pain without rendering him unconscious. Try again. Blood dripped from Victor's split lip. His eyes were wild now, desperate. Lorenzo, I don't. Another blow. This one to the stomach, doubling Victor over in his restraints. You ordered Elena Ricci's death. Lorenzo's voice hadn't changed. Still soft. Still conversational. Still absolutely terrifying. 4 days ago. You found out she was alive, that she was looking into her father's files, and you ordered her killed. He gripped Victor's chin, forcing the older man to meet his eyes. I traced the order back to you, Victor. So please stop insulting my intelligence. Victor's resolve crumbled. Lorenzo could see it happen. The moment the older man realized that lies wouldn't save him, that his only chance was truth. I had no choice. Victor's voice was a broken whisper. You have to understand, I had no choice. They would have killed me. Who? The commission. Victor's words tumbled out in a rush. 20 years ago, before your father's death, there was a vote. A secret vote among the families. They decided that the DeSantis family had grown too powerful, too ambitious. They voted to eliminate your father and take over his territory. Lorenzo's grip tightened on Victor's chin. Your father had allies. Victor continued, his voice breaking. Salvatore Ricci was one of them. He found out about the vote. He was going to warn your father, going to help him fight back. So the commission ordered his death. The fire was meant to destroy him and his entire family, to make sure no one could inherit his knowledge. And you? Lorenzo's voice was ice. What was your role? Victor's eyes filled with tears. I was young. Ambitious. The commission offered me a choice, join them or die with your father. I chose survival. He sobbed openly now. I didn't know they were going to kill the children. I swear, Lorenzo, I didn't know about the Ricci family until after it was done. But you knew about my father. Lorenzo released Victor's chin and stepped back. You knew they were going to kill him. And you said nothing. I was scared. You were a coward. Lorenzo's voice was flat. You've been a coward your entire life, Victor. And you've been lying to me for 15 years. Standing at my side, advising me, guiding me, all while knowing that you helped murder the man I loved like a father. Please. Victor's voice was barely audible. Please, Lorenzo. I'll tell you everything. The commission members, their plans, everything. Just let me live. Lorenzo studied the broken man before him. This creature who had been his mentor, his advisor, his trusted confidant. This pathetic, trembling thing who had betrayed everything Lorenzo thought he knew about loyalty and honor. The names. Lorenzo's voice was cold. Every member of the commission who voted for my father's death. Every person involved in the order to kill the Ricci family. Everyone who knew Elena was alive and participated in the attempt on her life. Victor gave him names. Dates. Details that would have seemed impossible 20 minutes ago. Secrets that had been buried for decades. Lorenzo listened to each revelation, committing them to memory, building the framework for a vengeance that would reshape the underworld entirely. When Victor finally finished, gasping and broken, Lorenzo nodded once. Thank you, Victor. He turned toward the door. That was very helpful. You're letting me live? Hope flickered in Victor's eyes. Lorenzo paused at the threshold. He looked back over his shoulder, and the smile that curved his lips was the coldest thing Victor had ever seen. I didn't say that. He walked out without another word, leaving Victor's screams to echo in the concrete chamber behind him. Dawn was breaking over the city when Lorenzo finally left his compound. He'd showered, changed into a fresh suit, and composed his features into their usual mask of cold control. But underneath that mask something was churning. Something hot and dark and desperate for outlet. He drove to the hospital himself, ignoring Marco's offer to accompany him. He needed to see her. Needed to tell her what he'd learned. Needed to look into her eyes and promise her that everyone who had ever hurt her would suffer. The security detail nodded as he passed. The nurses on duty averted their eyes, intimidated by his presence. The hospital itself seemed to hold its breath as he walked through its corridors, this apex predator moving through civilian territory. Elena's room was quiet when he entered. She was awake, sitting up in bed with a book in her lap, morning light gilding her dark hair. When she saw him, she set the book aside, and the smile that bloomed across her face was like sunrise after an endless night. You came back. I said I would. He closed the door behind him, then stood there, suddenly uncertain. The rage that had sustained him through Victor's interrogation had burned itself out. What remained was something he didn't have a name for, something vulnerable and terrifying. I heard the nurses talking. Elena's voice was soft. They said something happened last night. Something involving your organization. She searched his face. You look tired. I found the people who hurt you. He moved toward her bed, each step deliberate. They won't hurt you again. They won't hurt anyone again. Elena didn't ask for details. She'd grown up in this world after all. She understood what he was saying without needing it spelled out. Was it Victor? The question came out barely audible. The files I found, his name was all over them. He was involved in whatever happened to my family. Lorenzo stopped at her bedside. He looked down at her pale face, at her dark eyes, at the bandages still visible beneath her hospital gown. Something cracked inside him. Yes. The word came out rough. It was Victor. He was part of it. He knew what was going to happen to your family, and he did nothing. Elena closed her eyes. A single tear escaped down her cheek. All those years. Her voice shook. He stood next to you at every family gathering. He called you son. And the whole time he knew. He's not going to hurt anyone else. Lorenzo reached out, his tattooed hand hovering over her face, not quite touching. I promise you that, Elena. I promise you. She opened her eyes and looked at him, really looked at him, with an expression that stripped away every defense he'd ever built. Stay with me. It was barely a whisper. Please, Lorenzo. I know you have things to do, people to deal with. But just for a little while, stay. He should say no. He should maintain distance. He should protect her from himself, from the darkness that lived inside him, from the blood that was still metaphorically staining his hands. But her eyes were so soft. Her voice was so broken. And she was asking for him, only for him, the way no one had asked for him in 15 years. Lorenzo lowered himself into the chair beside her bed. He didn't take her hand, that felt too intimate, too dangerous. But he settled there, within reach, close enough that she could feel his presence. I'll stay. Elena smiled, and something in Lorenzo's chest shifted. Something fundamental. Something permanent. He was in trouble. He knew that now with crystal clarity. This woman, this ghost from his past, this vulnerability he couldn't afford, had gotten under his skin. She was making him feel things he'd spent 15 years trying to bury. She was making him want things he had no right to want. And he had no idea how to stop it. The hospital room was quiet, morning light streaming through the windows, and Elena Ricci fell asleep with Lorenzo DeSantis watching over her like a dark guardian angel. She didn't know what he'd done in the night. She didn't know about Victor's broken body in his basement, about the list of names burning in his mind, about the war he was about to unleash on the very foundations of the underworld. All she knew was that he was there, that he had come back, that when she reached out in her sleep, her hand finding his where it rested on the arm of his chair, he didn't pull away. His fingers closed around hers, gently, carefully, as if she were something precious, and he watched her sleep with an expression that would have terrified his enemies. Because Lorenzo DeSantis, the most feared man in the city, the monster who had built an empire on violence and control, Lorenzo DeSantis was falling in love. And he had absolutely no idea how to survive it. Elena woke to the sensation of warmth against her fingers, and for a moment she didn't understand. Then memory flooded back. Lorenzo's arrival, his confession about Victor, her desperate request for him to stay, and her eyes flew open. He was still there. Still in the chair beside her bed, his hand still wrapped around hers, his dark eyes fixed on her face with an intensity that stole her breath. He hadn't slept. She could see that in the shadows beneath his eyes, in the tension that still coiled through his shoulders. But he hadn't left either. How long was I asleep? Her voice came out rough, heavy with exhaustion and emotion. For hours. His thumb moved across her knuckles, a gesture so tender it seemed impossible coming from him. You needed it. Elena shifted in the bed, wincing slightly at the pull of her stitches, and Lorenzo's expression immediately sharpened with concern. Pain. Manageable. She squeezed his hand, drawing his attention back to her face. You stayed the whole time. I said I would. Such simple words. Such an ordinary promise. But coming from Lorenzo DeSantis, they meant something profound. This man who trusted no one, who kept the world at arm's length, who had built walls so high that even his closest associates couldn't breach them. He had sat beside her bed for 4 hours, holding her hand, watching over her sleep. You should eat something. Lorenzo released her hand and stood, creating distance between them. The loss of contact felt physical, like a cold wind against her skin. I'll have someone bring breakfast. Lorenzo. And the doctor should check your bandages. He was already moving toward the door, retreating behind his walls. You've been moving too much. The stitches might have pulled. Lorenzo. He stopped with his hand on the doorknob, his back to her, tension visible in every line of his body. Look at me. Her voice was soft but steady. Please. He turned. Fully. Reluctantly. When his eyes met hers, she saw something raw there, something vulnerable that he was trying desperately to hide. Thank you. She held his gaze, refusing to let him look away. For staying. For protecting me. For being here when I needed you. His jaw tightened. His tattoos seemed darker against his skin in the morning light, the Italian script on his neck disappearing into his collar like secrets he couldn't quite contain. You don't need to thank me. His voice was rough. Your father saved my life. This is. Don't. She cut him off, her voice sharper than she intended. Don't reduce this to a debt. Don't pretend you're here because of my father. Lorenzo's eyes flickered. Something dangerous moved behind them. What do you think I'm here for, Elena? The question hung between them, heavy with implications. Elena's heart pounded against her ribs, but she refused to back down. She'd spent 15 years running, hiding, surviving. She was done being afraid. I think you're here because you want to be. She pushed herself up in the bed, ignoring the protest of her wounds. I think you stayed all night because you couldn't bear to leave. I think. Her voice caught, but she forced herself to continue. I think you feel something for me that scares you. Lorenzo crossed the room in 3 strides. He moved so fast that Elena barely had time to register it before he was beside her bed, one hand braced on the mattress near her hip, his face inches from hers. This close, she could see every detail of him. The slight stubble on his jaw, the flecks of gold in his dark eyes, the intricate ink that decorated his skin like a map of violence and survival. You have no idea what I feel. His voice was barely audible, a whisper that seemed to vibrate through her bones. You have no idea what you're asking for. Then tell me. She didn't flinch from his proximity. Didn't look away from those dangerous eyes. Stop hiding, Lorenzo. Stop running. Tell me what you feel. For a moment she thought he would pull away. She could see the struggle in his expression, the war between desire and discipline, between the man he wanted to be and the monster he believed himself to be. Then his hand came up to cup her face. His palm was warm and rough against her cheek, his fingers curling into her hair with a gentleness that made her eyes sting with unshed tears. His thumb traced the curve of her cheekbone, and she saw something break open in his expression, something desperate and wounded and utterly without defense. I watched you sleep. The confession came out raw and unpolished, stripped of his usual control. I watched you sleep and I thought about all the years I believed you were dead. All the nights I dreamed about the fire, about the family I couldn't save, About the girl who used to look at me like I was something worth loving. Elena's breath caught. I'm not a good man, Elena. His thumb continued its slow path across her skin. I've killed people. I've destroyed lives. I've done things that would make you look at me differently if you knew. I know what you are. Her voice was steady despite the tears threatening to fall. I've always known. Then you know why this is impossible. His eyes searched hers, desperate for understanding. You know why I can't, why we can't. Lorenzo. She reached up to cover his hand with her own. The only impossible thing here is you pretending you don't want this. Something shifted in his expression. Something fierce and hungry and absolutely terrifying. Want. The word came out like a growl. You think this is about wanting? I've spent 4 days trying to stay away from you. 4 days telling myself that I was protecting you, that you were better off without me in your life. And every single moment of those 4 days I thought about you. Your face. Your voice. The way you said my name when you were bleeding and broken and barely conscious. His grip on her face tightened slightly, not painfully but possessively. This isn't want, Elena. This is obsession. This is madness. This is... He stopped, struggling for words, and when he spoke again his voice was barely a whisper. This is everything I've spent 15 years trying not to feel. Elena moved without thinking. She closed the distance between them, her lips brushing against his in a kiss that was barely more than a question. A possibility. An invitation. Lorenzo went rigid. For one terrible moment she thought she'd made a mistake. Thought he would pull away, retreat behind his walls, disappear again into the cold distance that kept him safe. Then his other hand came up to cradle her face and he kissed her back. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't tender. It was desperate and fierce and overwhelming, 15 years of grief and longing and impossible hope pouring through the contact between them. His mouth moved against hers with the same intensity he brought to everything. Complete, consuming, absolute. Elena's hands found his shoulders, his neck, the short dark hair at his nape. She pulled him closer, deeper, wanting more of him, wanting everything he'd been holding back. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Lorenzo's forehead rested against hers. This is dangerous. His voice was rough. Feeling this. Wanting this. I don't care. She kissed him again, quick and fierce. I've spent 15 years being safe, Lorenzo. Being careful. Being dead. Her hands framed his face, forcing him to meet her eyes. I'm done being safe. I want to live. I want to feel. I want... She stopped, suddenly uncertain. What? His voice was soft. Coaxing. Tell me what you want, Elena. You. The word came out simple and honest. I want you. Lorenzo's eyes darkened. Something predatory moved behind them, something that should have frightened her but didn't. You have no idea what you're asking for. His hands slid from her face to her shoulders, his touch possessive and careful at once. I'm not the boy you remember. I'm not capable of... He stopped, struggling for words. I don't know how to be gentle. I don't know how to be normal. All I know is control and violence and the particular kind of love that consumes everything it touches. I don't want normal. Elena's hands dropped to his chest, feeling his heart pound beneath her palms. I don't want gentle. I want you, Lorenzo. Exactly as you are. The sound he made was half groan, half surrender. He pulled back slightly, creating enough distance to look at her properly, and the expression on his face was something she'd never seen before. Open, vulnerable, utterly without armor. If I let myself have this... His voice was barely audible. If I let myself love you the way I want to, I won't be able to stop. I won't be able to let you go. I'll become the monster everyone believes I am, and I'll keep you forever, and I won't apologize for it. Promise. The word slipped out before she could stop it. Lorenzo's expression shifted. The vulnerability was still there, but now it was mixed with something darker. Something possessive. Something that made her pulse race and her breath catch and her entire body come alive with anticipation. Be careful what you ask for, Elena. His thumb traced her lower lip, his eyes tracking the movement with predatory focus. Some promises can't be broken. The door opened without warning. They sprang apart, not quite quickly enough, as the head doctor entered, chart in hand, clearly oblivious to what he'd interrupted. Ms. Ricci, I need to check your... He looked up and froze, his eyes darting between Elena's flushed face and Lorenzo's barely controlled expression. I can come back. No. Lorenzo stepped back, his mask sliding back into place. The transformation was remarkable. One moment he was raw and vulnerable, the next he was the cold, controlled mafia boss that everyone feared. Check her wounds. Make sure she's healing properly. He moved toward the door but paused at the threshold. I have business to attend to. He didn't look at Elena, but his voice carried a weight that only she would understand. I'll return tonight. Then he was gone, and Elena was left with a racing heart and a confused doctor and the taste of Lorenzo DeSantis still lingering on her lips. The day passed in a blur of medical examinations and forced rest. The doctor pronounced her healing well, though he cautioned against any strenuous activity. The nurses came and went, bringing food she barely touched and medication that made her drowsy. Through it all, Elena's mind kept returning to Lorenzo's kiss, to his confession, to the way he'd looked at her like she was the only real thing in his world. She'd meant what she said. She wanted him exactly as he was, darkness and violence and all. She'd grown up in his world after all. She understood what he did, what he'd become, what he was capable of. And she'd seen beneath all that, to the wounded boy who had once taught her to play cards, who had carried her to bed when she fell asleep on the couch, who had protected her with a fierce devotion that had nothing to do with obligation. That boy was still in there somewhere. Buried beneath years of violence and survival, but still present. She'd seen him this morning in the way Lorenzo looked at her, in the way he kissed her, in the desperate confession he'd made. She was going to find that boy again. She was going to reach through the darkness and pull him into the light. Or she was going to let herself be pulled into the darkness with him. Either way, she wasn't letting go. Evening fell over the city, painting the hospital room in shades of gold and amber. Elena had managed to shower, carefully with the help of a nurse, and change into fresh clothes that someone had brought from the apartment she no longer lived in. She sat in bed, a book open on her lap, waiting. Waiting for Lorenzo. He arrived at 8 p.m. exactly, and something had changed. The cold control was still there, the expensive suit and the visible tattoos and the aura of danger that surrounded him like a second skin. But underneath all that there was an energy, a barely contained intensity that made the air in the room feel charged with electricity. The doctor says you're healing well. Lorenzo closed the door behind him and stood there, watching her with those unreadable eyes. You should be released in a few days. Where will I go? The question came out before Elena could stop it. I can't go back to my apartment. The people who attacked me know where I live. You'll stay with me. It wasn't an offer. It wasn't a request. It was a statement of fact, delivered with the absolute certainty of a man who was not accustomed to being questioned. Elena's heart skipped. Lorenzo. You need protection. He moved toward her bed with that fluid grace that made him seem like something other than human. I have the resources to provide it. The alternative is... He paused, his jaw tightening. There is no alternative. You're staying with me. What about what I want? The question stopped him in his tracks. He stood beside her bed, looking down at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. What do you want? Elena set aside her book and met his gaze squarely. To know what this morning meant. To know if that kiss was real or if it was just, she gestured vaguely. A moment. An aberration. Something you're going to pretend never happened. Lorenzo's expression shifted. Something dark and hungry flickered behind his eyes. An aberration. He tested the word, his voice soft and dangerous. Is that what you think it was? I don't know what it was. That's why I'm asking. He moved closer. Close enough that she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. Close enough that she could smell his cologne, something dark and expensive that she wanted to bury herself in. I've spent the entire day thinking about you. His voice was barely above a whisper. Every meeting. Every phone call. Every moment of every hour. I've thought about the way you tasted, the way you felt, the sound you made when I kissed you. Elena's breath caught. I've thought about taking you from this hospital, bringing you to my home and never letting you leave. His hand came up to cup her face, his thumb tracing her cheekbone with devastating gentleness. I've thought about all the things I want to do to you, all the ways I want to have you, all the promises I want to make. That doesn't sound like an aberration. Her voice came out shaky, but she didn't look away. It's not. His thumb moved to her lower lip, pressing gently. This morning wasn't a moment of weakness or a mistake I'm going to pretend didn't happen. This morning was the beginning. The beginning of what? Lorenzo leaned closer, his lips brushing against her ear as he spoke. The beginning of us. The words sent a shiver down her spine. She turned her head slightly, bringing her lips close to his, feeling his breath warm against her mouth. And what does us look like? She whispered. What does it mean to be with you, Lorenzo? It means everything. He pulled back enough to meet her eyes, and the intensity in his gaze made her stomach clench. It means you belong to me and I belong to you. It means no one touches you, no one threatens you, no one even looks at you wrong without answering to me. That sounds possessive. I told you this morning. His voice was rough. I don't know how to be gentle. I don't know how to love quietly or reasonably or with any kind of restraint. I love the way I do everything else, completely, obsessively, without limits. Elena reached up and placed her hand against his chest, feeling his heart pound beneath her palm. What if I want limits? She watched his expression carefully. What if I want a normal relationship with normal expectations and normal boundaries? Lorenzo's jaw tightened. For a moment she saw the struggle in his eyes, the fear that she would reject him, that his darkness would drive her away, that he would lose her again after only just finding her. Then he spoke, and his voice was quiet and honest in a way she'd never heard before. Then I would try. His hand covered hers on his chest. I would try to give you what you wanted, even if it went against every instinct I have. Because... He stopped, struggling for words. Because you matter more than my instincts. You matter more than my nature. You matter more than anything I've ever let myself want. Elena's eyes filled with tears. Lorenzo. I know what I am. He pressed her hand harder against his heart. I know what I've done, what I'm capable of. But when I'm with you, I want to be something better. Someone worthy of the way you look at me. You are. She pushed herself up, ignoring the pull of her stitches, and cupped his face in her hands. You've always been worthy, Lorenzo. You just never believed it. Something cracked in his expression. Something raw and wounded and utterly without defense. And then he was kissing her. It was different from this morning. Softer, slower, more reverent. His hands cradled her face like she was something precious, something sacred, and his mouth moved against hers with a gentleness that made her heart ache. Stay with me. He breathed the words against her lips. Not because you need protection. Not because I'm demanding it. His forehead pressed against hers. Stay with me because you want to. Yes. The word came out without hesitation. Yes, Lorenzo. I'll stay. His grip on her face tightened. His breath came out in a rush that sounded like relief. Then he kissed her again, and this time there was nothing gentle about it. Elena was released from the hospital 3 days later. She walked out on her own 2 feet, Lorenzo beside her, his hand at the small of her back in a gesture that was both protective and possessive. The staff watched them go with expressions ranging from curiosity to fear. No one could quite figure out why the most powerful man in the city was personally escorting a recovering stabbing victim from the premises. But Elena knew. She knew because of the way Lorenzo looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching. She knew because of the hours he'd spent at her bedside, sometimes talking, sometimes silent, always present. She knew because of the kisses he stole when the nurses weren't looking, and the way his hands trembled when he touched her, and the confessions he whispered against her skin in the quiet hours of the night. Lorenzo DeSantis was in love. And he had absolutely no idea how to handle it. His penthouse occupied the top 3 floors of a building he owned in the heart of the city. It was exactly what Elena had expected. Cold, modern, designed for control rather than comfort. Everything was black and gray and chrome, sharp angles and expensive materials arranged with clinical precision. It's very you. Elena stood in the center of the living room, taking in the floor-to-ceiling windows, the minimalist furniture, the complete absence of personal touches. Controlled. Intimidating. Beautiful in a way that makes you uncomfortable. Lorenzo's lips twitched, almost a smile. I'll take that as a compliment. It was meant as one. She turned to face him, and the afternoon light caught his features, highlighting the sharp planes of his face and the dark ink that climbed his neck. But it's missing something. What? Life. She gestured at the sterile space. Color. Warmth. Evidence that a human being actually lives here, not just exists. Lorenzo moved toward her, his expression unreadable. I've never cared about any of that before. And now. He stopped inches away, his presence overwhelming in the vast empty space. Now I'm thinking about what changes you might make. His hand came up to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. What colors you might bring in. What evidence of your presence you might leave behind. Elena's heart stuttered. That sounds permanent. I told you. His voice dropped to that dangerous whisper that made her bones melt. I don't do things by halves. I don't love with restraint or plan for endings. His thumb traced the curve of her ear. When I want something I keep it. Forever. She should have been frightened. A declaration like that from a man like him should have sent her running. Instead she stepped closer, eliminating the last inches of distance between them. Then keep me. Her voice was steady despite the pounding of her heart. Make this place ours instead of yours. Fill it with evidence of us. Lorenzo's eyes darkened. Be careful what you offer, Elena. His hands found her hips, pulling her firmly against him. I told you, some promises can't be broken. Good. She rose on her toes, bringing her lips close to his. I don't want them to be. The kiss that followed was interrupted by Lorenzo's phone. He growled against her mouth but pulled back, his expression shifting from heated to cold as he glanced at the screen. I have to take this. Go. She stepped back, giving him space. I'll explore. He caught her hand before she could turn away, bringing her knuckles to his lips. Don't go far. His eyes held hers with burning intensity. I have plans for tonight. Then he was gone, disappearing into what she assumed was a study, and Elena was left alone in the vast penthouse with a racing heart and flushed cheeks. She explored as promised, finding 3 bedrooms, all unused, a kitchen that looked like it had never been cooked in, and a library that actually showed some signs of personality, worn books on the shelves, a well-used armchair by the window, a half-empty glass of whiskey forgotten on a side table. This was where Lorenzo actually lived, she realized. This small corner of controlled chaos in an otherwise sterile world. She was running her fingers along the spines of his books when she heard raised voices from the study. Not Voice's voice. Lorenzo's, specifically, and it was sharp with a fury she hadn't heard before. Elena moved toward the study, not quite eavesdropping but not quite not eavesdropping either. The door was partially open and Lorenzo's words filtered through clearly. I don't care what the commission thinks. Victor is dead and every single person who participated in the conspiracy against my father will follow him. Boss. Yes. Including them. I don't care how powerful they are. I don't care how connected. They tried to kill someone. He stopped, and when he spoke again his voice was quieter but no less deadly. They made a mistake. They're going to pay for it. Elena's breath caught. He was talking about her. About the people who had attacked her, who had killed her family, who had been trying to eliminate her for 15 years. She hadn't realized the scope of his vengeance until that moment. This wasn't just about finding the men who had stabbed her in an alley. This was about dismantling an entire network. Taking apart a conspiracy that had shaped both their lives. Going to war on her behalf. Lorenzo ended the call and emerged from the study to find Elena standing in the hallway, her expression unreadable. You heard. It wasn't a question. Some of it. She searched his face. You're going after all of them. The people responsible for the fire. The commission members who voted to kill your father. Yes. That's dangerous. They're powerful, you said so yourself. I'm more powerful. He moved toward her, his presence filling the hallway like smoke. And they took something from me. They took everything from me. My father. My mentor. 15 years believing you were dead. His hands found her shoulders, gripping with careful intensity. I'm going to make them understand what that cost them. And if it costs you something too? Her voice was barely a whisper. If they hurt you, kill you, they won't. You can't know that. Lorenzo's grip tightened. Elena. I can't lose you. The words burst out of her, raw and desperate. I just found you again, Lorenzo. After 15 years of running and hiding and believing that everyone I loved was dead. I can't. Her voice broke. I can't watch you die for me. Something shifted in Lorenzo's expression. The cold determination softened into something gentler, something achingly tender. You won't. He pulled her into his arms, wrapping himself around her like a shield. I promise you, Elena. I'm not going to leave you. You can't promise that. Her words were muffled against his chest. No one can promise that. I can. He pulled back enough to meet her eyes, and the absolute certainty in his gaze stole her breath. Because I've spent 15 years building an empire specifically so that nothing could threaten me ever again. Because I have resources and allies and weapons that my enemies can't imagine. And because... He paused, struggling for words. Because I have something to live for now. Someone to come home to. Elena's eyes filled with tears. That's not fair. She tried to sound angry, but it came out soft. Using romance to win an argument. I'll use whatever works. His thumb brushed away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. I'm not above manipulation when it comes to keeping you safe. I'm not the one who needs keeping safe. She placed her hands flat against his chest. You're the one planning to take on an entire criminal conspiracy. Which I will do. His voice was firm. With or without your blessing, Elena. This isn't negotiable. These people killed your family. They tried to kill you. They've been a threat to everything I care about for 20 years. His jaw tightened. They and all of them. That's not a question, it's a statement of fact. Elena looked up at him. This man who was darkness and violence wrapped in expensive tailoring, whose tattoos told stories of blood and survival, who had just confessed to planning wholesale murder on her behalf. And she realized something. She wasn't afraid. She wasn't disgusted or horrified or questioning her choices. She was proud. Okay. Her voice came out steady. Take them apart. Destroy everything they've built. Make them understand what it means to threaten us. Lorenzo's eyes widened slightly. Us. You said it yourself. She rose on her toes, bringing her face close to his. I belong to you and you belong to me. That means your enemies are my enemies, your wars are my wars, your vengeance is my vengeance. He kissed him quick and fierce. Just promise me you'll come home when it's done. Always. He breathed the word against her lips. I'll always come home to you. The next weeks were a study in contradictions. Elena settled into the penthouse, slowly transforming it from a sterile monument to control into something resembling a home. She brought in plants, changed the neutral throw pillows for ones in warm colors, filled the unused kitchen with the smell of actual cooking. Lorenzo watched these changes with an expression somewhere between confusion and wonder, as if he couldn't quite believe she was real. Meanwhile, outside the penthouse walls, Lorenzo waged a silent war. The commission members who had voted for his father's death began to disappear, one by one, systematically, without witnesses or evidence. The criminal underworld whispered about a phantom, about retribution, about the terrible price of crossing Lorenzo DeSantis. Elena didn't ask for details. She didn't want to know which of his late nights were spent in boardrooms and which were spent in basements. What mattered was that he came home. Every night, no matter how late, Lorenzo returned to her. Sometimes exhausted, sometimes vibrating with barely contained violence, but always reaching for her the moment he walked through the door. Their relationship developed its own rhythm. Morning coffee on the balcony, watching the city wake beneath them. Quiet dinners where Lorenzo would watch her eat like she was performing miracles. Late nights tangled together on the couch. Elena reading while Lorenzo pretended to review documents but actually just watched her. And the kisses. God, the kisses. Lorenzo kissed her like he was trying to memorize her, like every touch of his lips against hers was a prayer against losing her. He kissed her when she woke up and when she fell asleep and at random moments throughout the day, passing her in the kitchen, finding her in the library, walking through the door after hours apart. But he didn't push for more. Every night he held her while she slept, his body curved protectively around hers, his breath warm against her neck. Every night she felt the evidence of his desire pressed against her, heard the way his breathing changed when she shifted in his arms. And every night he kept himself in check, kissing her goodnight with devastating restraint before forcing himself to sleep. It was driving her slowly insane. 3 weeks after Elena moved into the penthouse, she decided to do something about it. She waited until evening, until Lorenzo returned from whatever business had occupied his day. She heard the door open, heard his voice dismissing Marco, heard his footsteps approaching the living room where she waited. She'd planned for this. She wore the silk robe he'd bought her, deep crimson against her pale skin, belted loosely at the waist. Her hair was down, falling in dark waves around her shoulders. She dimmed the lights and put music on and arranged herself on the couch like an offering. Lorenzo stopped in the doorway. His eyes moved over her, the robe, the exposed legs, the intention written in every line of her body. His expression flickered through several emotions too quickly to name before settling on something that looked almost like pain. Elena. His voice came out rough. What are you doing? I would think that's obvious. She rose from the couch, crossing the room toward him with deliberate slowness. Unless you need me to spell it out? This isn't. He stopped, visibly struggling for control. You've been through trauma. You're still healing. I won't. I'm healed. She stopped inches away, close enough to feel the heat radiating off his body. My stitches came out a week ago. The doctor said I was cleared for all normal activities. She reached up, loosening the knot of his tie. Including this one. Lorenzo caught her wrist, his grip firm but gentle. Elena. His eyes burned into hers. If we do this, I won't be able to stop. I won't be able to go back to holding you at night and pretending I don't want more. I won't be able to. He cut himself off, jaw clenching. Good. She stepped closer, eliminating the last distance between them. I don't want you to stop. I don't want you to pretend. I want you, Lorenzo. All of you. The parts you show the world and the parts you hide. His grip on her wrist tightened. You don't know what you're asking for. Then show me. She rose on her toes, bringing her lips to his ear. Stop protecting me from yourself. Stop treating me like I'm fragile. I'm not the 9-year-old girl you remember. Her free hand found his chest, feeling his heart pound beneath her palm. I'm a woman who knows exactly what she wants. Lorenzo made a sound, half groan, half surrender, and then his mouth was on hers. The kiss was nothing like the ones that had come before. This was consuming, demanding, absolutely without restraint. His hands found the belt of her robe and pulled, letting the silk fall open, letting his hands find her skin. Elena gasped against his mouth, her fingers working the buttons of his shirt with trembling urgency. She'd waited 3 weeks for this. 3 weeks of careful distance and restrained touches and kisses that promised but didn't deliver. Now she was going to have everything. Lorenzo lifted her without breaking the kiss, her legs wrapping around his waist as he carried her toward the bedroom. The penthouse passed in a blur of sensation. His mouth on her neck, his hands on her thighs, his voice in her ear whispering things that made her blood sing. He laid her on the bed like she was something precious, then stood over her, breathing hard, his shirt hanging open to reveal the tattooed chest beneath. Last chance. His voice was raw. Tell me to stop and I will. Tell me you're not sure and I'll walk away. Elena reached for him, pulling him down onto the bed, onto her. I'm sure. She kissed the tattoo over his heart. I'm sure. I'm sure. He cut off her words with his mouth, and after that there was no more talking. Later. Much later. Elena lay in Lorenzo's arms, her head on his chest, her body deliciously exhausted. His fingers traced lazy patterns on her back, and she could feel his heart beating steadily beneath her cheek. I love you. The words came out quiet, almost hesitant, and for a moment Elena wasn't sure she'd heard them correctly. She lifted her head to look at him. Lorenzo's expression was open in a way she'd rarely seen. Vulnerable, uncertain, waiting for rejection. The cold control he showed the world was completely absent. This was just a man lying in bed with the woman he loved, terrified she might not feel the same. I love you too. She pushed herself up to kiss him, soft and sweet. I've loved you since I was 9 years old and you let me win at cards. I didn't let you win. A ghost of a smile flickered across his face. You genuinely beat me. Liar. She kissed him again. But a charming one. Lorenzo's arms tightened around her, pulling her close against his body. Stay with me. His voice was rough with emotion. Not just now, forever. Stay with me, build a life with me, let me spend the rest of my existence making you happy. That sounds like a proposal. It is. He met her eyes with burning intensity. Marry me, Elena. Be mine in every way that matters. Let me give you my name, my protection, my life. Elena's breath caught. She should think about this. She should consider the implications, the complications, the reality of marrying a man like Lorenzo DeSantis. She should take time to decide. Instead she said the only word that mattered. Yes. Lorenzo's expression transformed. Shock, joy, something that looked almost like disbelief washing across his features. Yes. His voice cracked. You'll. Yes. She cupped his face in her hands. Yes, I'll marry you. Yes, I'll be yours. Yes to all of it, Lorenzo. Forever. He kissed her then, deep and claiming, and Elena felt the last broken pieces of herself click into place. She'd spent 15 years running from her past, hiding from her identity, surviving instead of living. Now she was home. The war continued, but now Elena was part of it. She wouldn't let Lorenzo face his enemies alone. Not when those enemies were hers too, not when the conspiracy they were dismantling had cost her everything she loved. So she became his partner in more than just life. She reviewed the files she'd discovered, helping him connect dots and trace threads. She attended meetings with his advisors, offering perspectives he hadn't considered. And slowly the commission crumbled. The members who had voted for Lorenzo's father's death fell one by one. Some to mysterious accidents, some to sudden illness, some to simple disappearance. The underworld whispered about the DeSantis reach, about the futility of standing against Lorenzo's vengeance, about the woman at his side who had risen from the dead to claim her own justice. 6 months after Elena walked out of that hospital, the last commission member died. Lorenzo came home that night different, lighter somehow. The weight he'd carried for 20 years had finally lifted, leaving behind a man she was only beginning to know. He found her in the library, curled in his favorite chair with a book, and sank to his knees before her. It's done. His voice was quiet. All of them. Everyone who hurt your family, everyone who threatened mine, they're gone. Elena set aside her book and took his face in her hands. How do you feel? He considered the question, his brow furrowing slightly. Empty, he admitted. I've spent so long focused on revenge that I don't know what to do without it. His eyes found hers. But also, free. For the first time since I was 18 years old, I feel free. Then let's make the most of it. She leaned forward, pressing her forehead against his. Build something new. Something that isn't about vengeance or survival. Something good. What did you have in mind? Elena smiled, the first genuinely carefree smile she'd allowed herself in years. I have a few ideas. They married 6 months later. It wasn't a large wedding. Lorenzo's world didn't lend itself to public celebrations, but it was perfect. A private ceremony in a garden Elena had fallen in love with, surrounded by the few people they truly trusted. Marco stood as Lorenzo's best man, looking uncomfortable in formal wear but unable to hide his genuine happiness. Maria, the woman who had raised Elena after the fire, wept openly from the front row. Elena wore white. Not because she was innocent, she wasn't, not anymore, not after the blood they'd spilled together, but because it felt right. A new beginning. A fresh start. Lorenzo wore black because he would always be Lorenzo, and his tattoos showed at his collar and cuffs like promises written in ink. When the officiant asked if he would take Elena as his wife, Lorenzo's voice rang out clear and certain. Forever. And when Elena said the same word in return, she meant it with every fiber of her being. The reception was small but warm. Good food, better wine, and the kind of genuine celebration that neither of them had experienced in years. Elena danced with Lorenzo beneath strung lights, her head on his shoulder, his arms wrapped around her like he would never let go. I never thought I'd have this. His voice was soft against her ear. A wife. The future. Something to live for besides revenge. And now I have everything. He pulled back to look at her, and the love in his eyes made her chest ache. You gave me back my humanity, Elena. You made me want to be more than the monster I'd become. You were never a monster. She reached up to touch the tattoo at his neck. You were a man who'd been through hell and survived. That's not the same thing. You see me differently than anyone else. His voice was wondering. You always have. Even when you were 9 years old and I was a violent, angry kid who didn't know how to exist in the world. That's because I see you. She rose on her toes to kiss him. Not the reputation. Not the empire. Just you. Lorenzo's arms tightened around her. I'm going to spend the rest of my life earning that. His voice was rough with emotion. Every day. Every moment. I'm going to be worthy of the way you love me. You already are. She kissed him again, deeper this time, not caring who was watching. You've always been worthy, Lorenzo. You just needed someone to remind you. They left the reception early because neither of them cared about propriety, and their wedding night was everything Elena had dreamed of, passionate and tender and overwhelming in equal measure. Lorenzo made love to her like she was precious, like she was the center of his universe, like every touch was both a claiming and a worship. And afterward, lying tangled together in their bed, Elena felt complete in a way she hadn't known was possible. She'd lost everything at 9 years old. She'd spent 15 years running, hiding, surviving. She'd believed that she would never be truly safe, never be truly happy, never be truly home. But here in Lorenzo's arms she finally was. Home. Years passed. The DeSantis empire flourished under Lorenzo's continued leadership, though Elena's influence softened its edges. They funded hospitals and schools in the communities they controlled. They shifted away from the most violent aspects of the business toward more legitimate enterprises. They became known not just for their power but for their unexpected mercy. And they built a family. Their first child, a daughter with Elena's dark eyes and Lorenzo's stubborn chin, was born 2 years after their wedding. Lorenzo held her like she was made of glass, tears streaming openly down his face, all pretense of cold control completely abandoned. "She's perfect," he whispered, looking from the baby in his arms to Elena in the hospital bed. "How is she this perfect?" "Because she's ours." Elena reached for his hand, exhausted but incandescent with joy. "Our daughter, Lorenzo. Our family. Our family." He repeated the words like a prayer, like a promise, like everything he'd ever wanted condensed into 2 small syllables. A son followed 3 years later, quieter, more serious, with Lorenzo's sharp mind and Elena's gentle heart. Their household filled with laughter and chaos and the particular kind of love that Lorenzo had never believed he deserved. But he learned to believe it. He learned, through years of Elena's patient love and his children's unconditional adoration, that he was worthy of happiness. That the darkness in his past didn't define his future. That the monster he'd feared becoming could be tempered by the light she'd brought into his life. He never became soft. He was still Lorenzo DeSantis, still powerful, still dangerous, still capable of terrible things when necessary. But the violence was controlled now, purposeful, used only in service of protecting what he loved. And what he loved was everything. 20 years after Elena had whispered his name in that emergency room, Lorenzo stood on the balcony of their home. A new house now larger, filled with evidence of the life they'd built, and watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Elena joined him, slipping her hand into his, her head coming to rest against his shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "The night you came back to me." His voice was soft. "The way you looked lying in that hospital bed. The way my whole world changed when you opened your eyes and said my name. You saved my life that night." "No." He turned to face her, his dark eyes full of emotion. "You saved mine. You brought me back from the edge, Elena. You gave me a reason to be more than what I was." She rose on her toes to kiss him, gently, lovingly, with all the tenderness of 2 decades shared together. "We saved each other," she said. "That's what love does." Lorenzo smiled. A real smile, the kind that reached his eyes, the kind that he'd learned to give only because of her. "That's what love does," he agreed. "That's what you do." He pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her as the sun sank below the horizon, and Elena let herself lean into his strength, his warmth, his absolute and unwavering devotion. She had walked into that emergency room broken and bleeding, whispering the name of a man she hadn't seen in 15 years. She had taken a leap of faith into darkness, trusting that the boy she remembered still existed somewhere inside the monster everyone else saw. And she had been right. Lorenzo DeSantis was not a good man by most measures. He was violent and possessive and capable of terrible things. But he was hers, completely, utterly, unconditionally hers. And she was his in exactly the same way. That was enough. That was everything. That was love. Thank you for listening to this story. If it touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe. Your support means everything and helps us bring you more stories like this one. The end.